Hey there, Nick Janatakis here. In this video, let's talk a little bit about testing. Specifically, how do you go about testing a code base that has no tests? So let's say that you're working on some code, right? You've been implementing all these features, things kind of work based on how you think they should work, but you don't have an automated test suite. So that's kind of a daunting task, right? It's like, well, how do you even begin to write tests? And that's what this video is going to focus on. So we're not going to focus on writing actual tests in some Python testing library or a JavaScript testing library. But what we are going to do is go through the motions of kind of figure out like what you could potentially test and patterns and strategies you can use to determine what you need to test. So we're going to do that by basically doing a practical real world example here, where we're going to take a look here at this audio player and then just come up with a whole bunch of different test cases that we can do. And we'll write them down on the paper or the Vim instance here on the right. And hopefully by the end of the video, you'll be able to kind of, see the workflow for that and then start applying it to your applications. It doesn't matter if it's a front-end app or not, it could be some Flask code, it could be Phoenix code, Node code, Django code, all that stuff. It doesn't really matter. The workflow of figuring out how to start is what matters. And let's get right to it. So right here, if we take a look at runninginproduction.com, this is the live version of my podcast site. You'll notice here that the audio player is pretty basic, right? It's just the HTML5 audio player. There's an audio tag on the page. There's literally nothing else. And whatever, it gets the job done. It looks different in every browser, which is a little bit weird. There's no way to control the playback speed here, which is something I really wanted. So what I did was, and by the way, this whole entire thing is open source here on GitHub. So what I did was I opened up an issue a while ago, and I'm like, let's open up an issue here with a help wanted for creating a custom, HTML5 audio player. And it didn't take too long, but after a couple weeks or whatever, Alex over here took a shot at doing that. And what we see here in the dev version of the code base, which is what we're looking at now, is that custom audio player. And I kind of went into this a little bit in a previous video talking about Jekyll or something like that. I just remember the audio player being the focus of that video. But here's the situation. So this is a Jekyll site, a static site, and there's no tests written here. And I surely don't have any front-end test suite running for JavaScript code. There's basically no JavaScript on this page other than the audio player now. And to make matters worse, not saying Alex is a bad developer, but I have no automated tests. I have no way to determine if this implementation of the audio player actually works. Now I could do some things, right? I can hit play and move things around, and that's kind of what we're going to be doing in this video, breaking down all of these steps. But to begin with, let's start with the most basic step possible, right? It's you load the page, right? Now it's well, what happens if I hit play? From running web apps in production. Okay, so it seems to play right away, so it can't be that busted since it played. But just to be safe, what I would do is, I would go to the inspector and take a look here at the console, right? It's well, do we have any errors? And again, you're not going to be able to follow along exactly. If you're writing a Flask application server side, there's no dev console, right? But it's the very basics here is does the code even run, right, without errors? And that's kind of the focus of this test. So there is no error here, okay? That is one test case. So what we could do is we can just write something this doesn't need to be a markdown document or whatever, but it can be what do we do? Well, it's load page with valid MP3, right? That's kind of just what we did here on this, it's a valid MP3, fine, okay. Now, I do have this draft open here, another episode. You notice that the episode numbers jump up because this is an old fork of the code base, whereas, there's a whole bunch of different episodes in between. But this one episode here, Marcelo's episode, is not out yet. It's coming out Monday, and I didn't move the file into the directory. So right now, there's actually no MP3 file to be loaded. So this is the empty state of what happens when the resource or thing isn't found. So we can go, load page with missing MP3, right? And we see some weird things here, right? Right away, we're getting like this not a number readout here for the timeline. Now, we're not even going to even really look at the JavaScript code because that's like not super important. That's up to the implementer to fix. Like, if you wrote your code base, you'd have to look at that and then fix it. But okay, so that's definitely a bug, I would say. Doesn't seem to be any console errors, but this is not, a friendly thing. It's a little bit strange. So now let's just like maybe transition to a different podcast episode. So maybe we'll just like jump to this one. Interesting. So I know this one actually has a valid MP3 file, but it's still showing the not as, the nan. So now it's like, well, this is a weird situation, right? It's like, well, I loaded up this one and it works, but I load up this one and it doesn't work. And they're both valid MP3 files. So like, what is the edge case there? Well, in this case, when I wrote this original page here, while I did use the default MP3 player, I did do some, cute little enhancements here where it's like, if you go to one of these, it'll just jump you right to where you left off. And it does that by saving things into local storage. So if I were to guess here, right, it's like, well, I'm not going to say if I were to guess because I sort of know the answer already. It's like, well, if I go to the local storage here in Chrome for episode 5, because that's the episode that we're looking at, this early bird one, there is no current time for episode 5 listed here. So that not as number, whatever, nan, this is because there's nothing defined in local storage. So I'm guessing there's a bug in the JavaScript code, which I actually really didn't look at, that just expects maybe a value to be here. And when it's not there, it just blows up. And that might be the missing link there. So maybe it's like, well, another test case here is load page with empty local storage for specific MP3. Okay, so then it's like load page with populated local storage for specific MP3. And the takeaway here is like, it's really, really important. These steps sound like, ooh, these are trivial steps. Like, why even bother testing them? Like, these are the exact workflows of like a user would take, right? It's like, it's important to decide, or it's important to make sure these are all there, right? Like, otherwise you're going to have like a test suite that's not that good because it's, your tests are only as good as you write them, right? But it's also a good idea not to like over test stuff, but still, okay, there's still more details to go over though. So we load this page with an empty local storage and a populated one, that's fine. So one little side note about this page is it's using turbolinks. And what that means is, well, this is actually a bad example because it just changed me over to the Jekyll site instead of the Nginx one. But you can see here when I click in between jumping these pages, like this is a really, really fast page transition. And that's because turbolinks is actually just swapping the body of the HTML, so it doesn't need to reparcel the assets, and that's great. But what it means is, like when I transition from page A to B, like interviews to podcasts, it's not actually like reloading any of the assets, and it's like not a fresh load of the JavaScript. So to really test that would be, and I have to go back to the Nginx version of the site here. There we go. To really test that, I have to do like a full-blown, like a Control-R, Control-F5 reload. You can see here I'm reloading the page now. And what that's going to do is basically, it's like a fresh load. So turbolinks is not in the equation. So in this case, it's really like load page with valid MP3, but then it's also like, transition to page with valid MP3. And maybe it's like F5 full page load, I guess, with valid MP3, and this would be the same thing for the missing one. Now, of course, yes, I would normally write that out as a step, so I guess, all right, let's just do it, fine, transition to page with missing MP3, if I can type, there we go, load page with local MP3 stores, okay, so these are the states so far, and it's like you can see, the level of detail of this is getting quite deep. We haven't even really gotten into like specifics yet. But now maybe a good idea would be to open up the console again, and we'll take a look here. Is there any other errors, like, pages with valid and invalid MP3s or missing MP3s? Like what happens if you go to like the home page, right? It's like this one has no video player at all. And it's like right away, it's like, okay, well, we have this cannot read query selector. Okay, so maybe we need to test for, let's see. So load page without player. Okay, so that's one test that we could have. And I guess maybe, that can kind of go over here, right? I don't think it's really worth it to go to like the TurboLinks version of that. So it just seems like as I transition between pages, that counter is going up. So there's clearly a bug here where, doing this query selector lookup, it expects that element to exist on the page. And when it doesn't exist, then it blows up. And it's kind of interesting, right, how all of this works, isn't it? It's like, well, we're discovering these bugs here, like the query selector bug. And it's like, once you know the problem, the solution is usually pretty easy, right? Like, I didn't even look at this code base, really, the JavaScript. Like, I once over it like a couple weeks ago or whatever. But like, yeah, I mean, I'm sure the implementation would be like a one-line if statement just to make sure the element is on the page. Otherwise, just like return early from all the JavaScript and don't do anything, right? Like, that's the fix. That's like a one-liner or, a couple lines, whatever. Okay, so let's go over some other things here. So like, what happens if I just like click anywhere on this audio player? Well, I don't see any errors. That's good. And I don't really see any side effects. So that's good. So it's like maybe a test here is, clicking an empty region of the player results in nothing breaking. That's a good test. What else could we do here? Well, maybe before we start going over behaviors of clicking things, maybe just like, let's just do a little look at the resizing of it. So, okay, so we have some tests here related to, viewing the page at various device resolutions, I guess you can say. So right now it's like the iPad view. The iPad view looks fine. This is how it should be. The iPad Pro, a little bit small on video, understandable, sorry about that. Also looks fine. Then we have an iPhone X, also looks good. Notice here too that there was a little copy button there. I can bring back the iPad one. So one of the features of this audio player is that you can actually click that and it's going to copy the exact point to your clipboard, which is like a nice feature. But that's missing from the audio. I mean, that's missing from the smaller devices simply because we ran out of room and we didn't want it to wrap to 3 lines. So that's like a specification. So that's normal. We wanted that. And maybe there's like ways to improve that, like maybe clicking the time itself could become a way to do that, but then it needs like a tooltip. But yeah, that's like beyond the scope of this. But visually speaking wise, it looks good. So let's maybe try like an iPhone 7 or something that also looks good. What about like a Pixel X large? Fine, that's good. What about a Pixel 2? Also looks good. What about the Galaxy? Yeah, I mean, everything is looking okay. The Galaxy seems to be at a different breakpoint though, where the speed control no longer fits. So he decided to hide that there. You can see there's a speed control, but now, which is at 411 pixels wide, now at 360, that's missing. I mean, I can deal with that. It's like, I mean, how many people are really using that phone? I don't know. Also, realistically speaking, if you're on a mobile device, you're probably playing the podcast through, some dedicated podcast app. I actually ran a Twitter poll on that, and like 88% of the people of like, 50 or so people voted saying that they would just use a dedicated app. So sometimes, yeah, you have to let your users dictate like your features in some sense, right? But okay, so viewing the page at various device resolutions. The next test here would be, viewing the page, well, I guess like with various browsers, right? That's like a whole nother thing though. I mean, we're just going to focus at looking at Chrome here, but ideally, once we have this test suite of all things, then we would we would do these motions through Firefox, through Edge, Internet Explorer 11. That's all on Windows. Then you would do the same thing for Mac and Linux and look at it on mobile devices, stuff like that. It really comes down to like, in this case, it's like, well, what browsers and versions do you want to support? Like, well, IE 11 and up is what I'd like to support. So those are the ones I'm going to focus on. But now let's go over some more stuff, right? It's like, well, okay, we have the play button. Here's Nick and today's guest. Okay, that's also super loud. So I'm just going to like bring that down to just so we can maybe hear a little bit, but it's not like overpowering. But, hitting the play button. Welcome to... Okay, so when you click play, okay, so let me click the play button. So what do we have? Some tests here, like ensure the MP3 plays. And another test is ensure the icon switches to pause, play based on the toggle state, because that's kind of what it is, right? Where pause is based on the toggle state. If I can type, why can't I type? Okay. Because it's two separate things, right? Here, it's like clicking play should make the thing play, but it also needs to update the icon, and those both work. So what happens also, like if you just go berserk and click this thing like a maniac. Okay, well, going berserk and clicking things like a maniac, clicking like a maniac works okay, or it doesn't break anything. So that's another test too, right? Sometimes you just gotta think, like sometimes people are crazy, right? It's like you gotta account for things like that, because maybe clicking that too fast, possibly there's a bug related to that. So another thing too is click the play button. So we need to make sure that this time loadout increments properly. So, okay, let's see. So we're at 15 seconds here. I'm with Lane Wagner, who is running. Okay, so the time loadout, or time label, you know, goes up after clicking play. Time label goes up after clicking play. I feel like that's not worded very well at all. Like time label goes up after time label increments goes up by 1 as MP3 plays. That's starting to get better. See, it's like writing is also very similar to coding, where naming things is super important. Like time label goes up by 1 second as MP3 plays. Like that is much more descriptive than what I had originally. Maybe there's even a better way, but it's like, I'm not going to split hairs at this point. This is pretty good. Okay, so then another test is like, well, if you hit pause, does it stop at that point? And it did, because it got up to 17 seconds before. Okay, so time label does not change when the MP3 is paused. Okay, that's another good test. And this is crazy, right? It's like we have all of these 5 tests written here, and that's just that little button. And now there's other tests here too, right? It's like, well, you know, does it work on a mobile devices? Because I don't know how it handles like a click event or something, right? That's something to think about. But that's maybe more specific to multiple browsers. So this thing increments fine. Another test would be, I guess, like, let's see, how time labels gets populated with correct MP3 duration, right? It's like this one is, 5629. In this case, there's no way to really determine that other than looking at the MP3 on file and making sure that the sizes match up. So that's something that we'll want to do for sure. I'm trying to just treat this, by the way, going from like left to right. But let's see here. Okay, so what else can we test about this little time label? So we have it going up or not going up based on if it's playing or not. We have the time label gets populated with a correct MP3 duration. Okay, so I mean, if you're going to start jumping into features now, it's like, well, if you go to the local storage here, we're dealing with episode 6. Well, here's episode 6, right? In the middle here. And we can see that the value for this is 17.7 seconds. And, that lines up to here. Like the rounding is like whatever, however JavaScript wants to round that up or down. So I guess you can say after playing in MP3, the time duration is set in local storage because that's what it needs to be. And, loading a page with an MP3 in local storage, jumps to specific seek time, I guess. Okay, so I'm not going to do this test because it involves closing the browser. Well, why not? I mean, we're here, so I can just paste that in. All right, so let me move that over here, close this one. And yeah, it jumped right to 17. So, loading a page with an MP3 in local storage jumps to specific time seek. That works. So that's basically, I think, all the functionality related to just that area. And again, remember, when it's writing tests, right, it's like, they're only as good as you are when writing these tests. Like you have to think of all of these cases, and it's not easy for everything. But I mean, the more you do it, the more practice you get, the more, you learn to like not take things for granted, right? It's like you got to break things down to like the almost smallest possible like state change you can imagine, and then kind of just write them down. And but we're just barely getting into this, right? And we already have like what is there, 30 lines or so here, and empty spaces as well. But these are all individual tests that you can write in whatever testing library that you want to use. Okay, so let's just work with the volume, not the volume control, the time seeker over here. So it's at 17 now. So okay, so I guess you can say like dragging around time seeker. I don't even know if that's a good label, but time seeker is fine for now. Okay. Let's go ensure MP3 is at the correct spot when you let go of the drag. I guess that's like the drop, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. But that seems to be fine. And now let's just see what happens when we hit play at the 27-minute mark.
A liar. I want to say...
Okay, that's also super loud. Maybe I'll just bring that down. Okay, yeah, I closed the tab, so that's actually another thing. A feature maybe would be to save the volume so you don't have to reset it every time. Okay, so anyways, back to the slider here for the time seeker. Ensure MP3 plays at specific point when paused at specific time. Okay, so what happens when you drag this thing all the way to the right? Okay, well, that's kind of interesting. Goes to 56:29 and it jumps to the beginning because I'm literally at the last second. Okay, I think I'm okay with that. It's like, well, if you finish the whole entire podcast, then it should loop you back to the beginning, but it shouldn't auto start playing it. So that behavior seems okay to me. But the test here is like, let's see, when at the end of the time seek, it loops back to the beginning without playing. Ensure, see, this needs to be refactored into being written a little bit better. Ensure it loops back to the beginning without playing. When at the end. When at the end. Yeah, I guess that's good. Okay, so what about the beginning? So we got the beginning. Okay, that's fine. And we check the middle. Okay, so again, it's like the maniac task now. It's like, and I apologize if the mic is sounding weird because I'm shaking my whole desk, but are things breaking? And let me open up Inspector just to be sure. Okay, nothing is breaking. The numbers seem to be updating good. Okay, so, when sliding around like a maniac, nothing breaks. Okay, that's good. Well, Vim is breaking apparently. Ambiguous test. I'll have to look into that one. If you know what that was, please let me know in the comments. Because I've been seeing that the last couple of days. I actually don't know why. But anyways, okay, things are looking good here. So another test maybe would be, and I'm just going to mute the volume. While playing this, and I jump to a different point, you can see it's moving up and up, up and up and up. What happens if I click like right there? Okay. So it continues to play even when I jump to a different point if the video or MP3 is already playing. And that's expected behavior. That's what we want, right? So dragging around the time seeker, ensure when playing, when you let go, it keeps up with where you are. Okay, that's good. I like that. Definitely an important test. And again, these test cases aren't the easiest thing to think about, but that is like an actual test case. So now let's go to maybe this other one here. So this one copies the current time to your clipboard so that you can go and paste this into IRC. If you're an IRC fan, email it to a friend, text it, whatever you want. So when I click that, first of all, that little label comes up, which is normal. So the action we're dealing with now is click copy time button, and that doesn't need to be indented. So ensure time URL gets copied to clipboard. Okay, I'm just going to paste that there, and we can see that it did. We get this little hash 3953, which is, if we look here at the time, it's 3953. So that definitely works. Okay, so we need also here, ensure label tooltip, I guess it's sort of a tooltip. Ensure tooltip gets shown and then hides after 2 seconds or so. I don't know the exact timing of the issue there, or not issue. It's like 1, 2, like whatever, 2 or 3 seconds, that's fine. Something I would also want to test now would be like, well, what happens if you're, on a pixel and you do that, right? Okay, well, I guess this is maybe a bug. I don't know how you want to classify that. I mean, it seems like it's working. Let me just change the time here to 16, let's say, and click it, and then paste it. Okay, so I got the 16 there. It still works on a mobile, but I don't like how it wraps to 2 lines. So maybe a bug there is this just needs to be a touch wider, because we got plenty of room on the left and right. So that's good. Sort of an easy fix. That's probably like a CSS thing. Maybe it just needs like 10 more pixels wide or something like that. Okay. So another thing, ensure time gets copied to the URL. Ensure. Okay. Let's say ensure it stays as 1 line on all devices. And that in this case, that would be an actual failing test, right? That's the implementation now needs to change because that's a test that failed. So what other things can we do to do this? So if it's like, well, if we spam click it like a maniac, let's move to a different area over here. Damn, almost landed on 42 on the dot. Let's see, spam clicking it, 4217, good to go. So, spam clicking, it results in nothing breaking. And my clipboard is still good to go. Okay. What else could we do here to test this thing? So we clicked it. Maybe it would be a good idea possibly to test it, like what happens when it's playing. So it's like 340. When this thing hits 352, I'm gonna click this and see if it does it at that point. So we're at let's see, 51, 2, clicking, and let's see where we're at here. If I paste that in. 352. Awesome. So this thing works. Ensure if playing, the copy button, the time still gets copied to the clipboard, right? That's an important test because I don't know how many people would actually copy that straight as they're playing, because ideally they might listen to it and they're like, ooh, that was kind of cool. Then maybe let us go back a couple seconds, pause it, and then copy it. That's probably the workflow. That's the workflow I've done on other sites. So, but I think that might, okay, so we actually we have a tooltip here too. Copy or click to copy current time. I understand that was small, sorry. Okay, so ensure title, ensure HTML title tags, tooltip is positioned correctly, is visible when hovered upon, I guess. Because there is it's just an HTML like tag property on there. Okay. But let's see what it looks like in a mobile device. I don't think it's actually going to show up because the hover isn't like a mobile thing. Okay, that's fine. I think people will be able to understand what that is anyways. And plus on most mobile devices, it's hidden anyways. But okay, so we've now taken care of the volume, the play, the time seeker, time label area, and the clicker over here. Let's just mess around with some playback speed now and see what happens. So I'm going to play this. We'll need some volume. Sorry.
How easy it is to spin up a...
Actually, I can't even hear it because my headphones aren't on. But I can sort of hear it a little bit echoing through the headphones that are on the desk below me. But let's see what happens when I put this thing as fast as possible, just so we can see a difference.
A server, the standard library in Go makes it really easy to spin up.
Yeah, I don't even need to hear it. The numbers go up faster. So, okay. So what are we dealing with now? We're dealing with click the time, click the playback speed button. So one test here is, well, actually I'm jumping ahead of myself maybe the real test should be, okay, so let me put it back at its default state. Like I want this thing to increment by 0.25 every time, and it is. Okay. So ensure, does the icon change when you do that? No. It doesn't really need to change. It can't be just one of these on a slower one because then it looks like a play icon. Okay, so ensure playback speed label increments from 0.75 to 2.0 at 0 at intervals. ensure playback speed, label increments. Oh man, it's wrapping to 2 lines. Ugh. Maybe I can get rid of DAX there. Damn it. It doesn't matter, right? I just wanted it to be easier to read on this little sidebar. Okay, not important. You can see though, this is like real life development, right? Sometimes you get hung up on these little like super like code style things. I think it's okay. Like if, your code, you want to make it pretty, although this is like just a temporary thing. But, sometimes I do agonize over names just to make it fit nicely, but not so much like I don't battle the code to fit in 80 characters. Like if it needs to wrap, I wrap it, and I wouldn't really make a variable shorter just so it doesn't wrap. But, it's something that I'm aware of. Like I want my code to look nice and also be functional and well named. If you can get all of those in one, then you are good to go. So the next thing is ensure the MP3 plays back at the selected speed. So, we saw that it does before, right? Each one, and that is fine. But what else could we do to maybe test this button? All right, so it does have a title as well. And that title, if you didn't catch it, just says something about control playback speed. Okay, so we have ensure HTML title tags tooltip is visible when hovered upon. Okay, we definitely want that. Because maybe, it's pretty obvious what that is if you just look at it, but just in case, I don't think it's too terrible to have like a playback speed tooltip there. You don't need it for things like volume and play because those are so like, that's like a whole another level of standard, whereas the playback speed, maybe it's not. So I don't mind the extra like UI hint there. So next up we have, and also no errors are happening, that is good. Anything else that we can maybe test, maybe just see, like, well, I don't think this is like that important, but let's say we're at like the maximum speed. Oh wait, actually another test we could do is, let's say it's playing.
Production ready server.
I'm going to mute that. And I'm going to increment this as it's playing. So it looks like that's definitely moving faster than a second. That's definitely going, yeah, that's incrementing twice per second. Okay, so when playing this thing, ensure when playing, the speed control still works. And again, now I know this video is already freaking 32 minutes long. Man, I'm so sorry. But this is like real life. When I name my actual test, like in the code itself, I would like make these more formally named. Like I'll try to be consistent. Like you can see I'm using the word ensure kind of a lot. It really depends on what testing framework you use. But now it's like I'm more interested in getting the states out of my head and on paper before like really like agonizing over like how I want to name the test function. But that is something I totally pay attention to when it comes to like implementation. And the things that we're doing now, like if I'm working with a code base, and this happens all the time. So like I do a lot of freelance work, and sometimes people take me on and they're like, hey, we have this code base. Can you go modify it? Or can you even write tests for it? And the process I'm going through right now is like, you're almost seeing me work how I would work in like real life or build time. I'm not usually doing it specifically for audio players, but the same exact workflow is like what I do all the time. And I think it's really valuable because if you really pay attention and take your time, this whole entire thing may take like an hour to write this out. Well, we're getting close to the end now because there's like 2 more things, but it's like, and there's also other stuff I'm talking about like this in the video, but you know what I mean? Like if you're getting paid to do some work, it's like, you want to be the guy who is not the guy that like doesn't test things well. Like you don't want to be that guy or girl or whatever, or non-binary maybe carbon entity, however you want to be identified. But yeah, you don't want to be that person, maybe, if that just ships code to be reviewed for someone who is paying you to do work, and then there's just like bug after bug after bug because you weren't rigorous enough in your tests. Now, some clients, you're upfront with them and you let them know, it's like, well, you mentioned that you wanted to be a little less rigorous in the test because of time constraints. Like if a client wants to pay you less to do less work, and you explicitly let them know, like, maybe your testing methods aren't going to be as exhaustive to save them money, then it's like, well, you get what you pay for. But, if they're paying you good money for good time to do these tests, like it's really important to really go through everything. But, okay. So, and what I was going to say here is like, not worth testing, which it kind of isn't because we already tested it. But like, if this thing is at 2x speed, like, is it getting written out for episode 6 at 2x speed there. I mean, I guess. Like it seems to be. But I don't, and this seems to be moving slower than that. So maybe this only gets incremented once per second or something like that. But like, to me, that seems like such a really, really crazy edge case for this audio player specifically. Like I would be okay with that. And even if this were off by like a second or something, I'd still be okay. But yeah, these are just things to account for. So we have this going here. We have all the stuff tested. Let's start talking a little bit more about the volume control, because the volume control, just looking at this thing, you know, it's really a combination of the toggle button to mute and unmute and also the slider. And there's some complication here, right? It's like, well, look at that. The icon changes as you go higher in volume, which is a nice UI hint, right? It's like you don't even need to have headphones on to know that this is a low volume because the slider is low and you have like a low icon. And like this, it's like muted. Okay, so some of the tests right away is like, well, if you're moving the slider around, does the icon change based on the volume? So let's start with, I guess you can say dragging around the volume slider. Okay, so we want to ensure the icon changes based on the volume's level. And, you know, if you wanted to get real specific in your test, you can maybe turn this into one test for each state. So, you know, it looks to be just eyeballing this. When it breaks past the 50% or higher mark, it changes to the, like the, you know, high volume. Otherwise, it's like the low volume or off. And there's nothing extra for max. So there's like 3 icon states. So you can really theoretically write 3 different tests there, right? Test to make sure the right icon is in the right one. I'm not going to go that far here, but you get the idea. So let's see. Let's do the crazy drag test like a maniac. Okay. Maniac test passes, which I like to see. How did I write the other one? Yeah. When sliding around like a maniac, nothing breaks. Okay. Also, let's just make sure that, you know, our console is here. We don't see any errors. I think we should also maybe be playing this too, right, to see what happens. So my apologies in advance.
While I'm also trying to build something useful.
Right. So usually, like, this is a point where, you know, I would ask, like, I actually can't hear it. I'm going to have to know, like, later, but I'm pretty sure it works, right? It's like, it'd be very strange if it didn't work. Because I can hear very subtle differences in the volume echoing from my headphones. So when MP3 is playing, the volume does change. Okay, because, you know, we did like the other one, we did the icon test, but we didn't really do the functionality test. Like now, while it's playing or whatever, that is the functionality test. So another test could be, well, you can see the video is paused now, right? It's not played. It's not playing. What happens if we, well, let's write the test first, like in some weird, like pseudo TDD form. You know, when MP3 is paused and we change the volume, does the new volume take place after pausing the MP3 or after resuming the MP3? Just to be a little bit more explicit of our words, right? Like, you know, pause now. So let's say we're paused, right?
Monolithic application, you're broken.
No, sorry. Let's say we're paused now. And let's say I mute this. When I play this, I would expect this to still be muted. We can see the time is incrementing. Okay. So that is very cool. So that actually would be a passing test. So now, what could we do? So let's, you know, bring that to somewhere in the middle. I think we're ready to talk about clicking the volume toggle button. That's what this thing is. Okay. So let's play it.
Like what made you go?
All right. I don't hear anything. So functionality wise and icon wise. Yep. Okay. So that works. So ensure the icon changes based on the toggle state. Ensure the MP3's volume gets muted, right? When the toggle state is muted. Ensure the MP3's volume gets, I guess you can say gets unmuted when the toggle is unmuted. Okay, that's cool. So we're getting pretty close now. So let's say we're over here. And what about at max volume? Does that still work? Yeah. Okay, so I don't think there's an extra real test case there. What about min volume? So right now there's no volume and it's muted. this is a tricky one. So like what happens now if you were to unmute that? What would you want to happen? Would you want it to be the icon state is muted and the volume is also zeroed out? So basically a no state change. So basically like if volume is 0 and toggle button is muted, then literally do nothing? That doesn't seem right to me. All right, let's see what happens. Okay, so it mutes it to it brings it back to 100%. All right, so what happens here if you're at the 50%? Okay, that for sure is working. Let me bring it back to 0. Huh, so it just brings you back to the previous one, like the previous volume. That seems like an okay behavior. I mean, yeah, it's really, let me just move it. Like right now it is a touch below muted. Yeah, I mean, and now it's fully muted. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that behavior, because if you've totally muted it out, right, and then it's like you unmute it, it's like, what do you want to actually happen? You'd expect it to be unmuted, even though you explicitly told it to be muted. You know what I mean? It's one of those weird ones. It's cool. I like that. So we tested everything, I'm pretty sure here. And yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go through the motions of testing it in every browser, but the idea now would be to run all of these through a browser and see what happens. So, I mean, I want to say this is a quick video on the workflow for writing tests for code that doesn't have tests. And of course, the next step here, right, would be to go to your testing library, refactor these sentences to make some style changes so they're all consistent, and then organize your tests using, whatever your test library supports. And at the end of the day now, it's like we have, 60 lines, like whatever, like I'm not going to count all of them, right? There's like probably 40 tests here. It's like just this little functionality, 40 tests, boom. Now, you have to be careful too about over-testing, right? It's like if you were testing something server-side, maybe it's not a good idea to write a unit test and an integration test that tests the same thing. Maybe the integration test alone is a good thing, but it really depends on how you write your tests, right? People who are very strict on TDD will go all out unit tests and then like retest it for integration tests. Maybe you decide to remove the unit test later for because you don't want like double test coverage, because that just makes your test a little bit more brittle and like it wastes time, because tests do take time to run. Like, 10 seconds versus 20 seconds is a big difference, if you're running that all the time. But anyways, this video, I don't want to focus it more on what, it's already 42 minutes. So I believe that is long enough for here. That's the workflow I would take when it comes to testing something new and foreign to me. Even in this case, is code that I didn't write. So now it's like we have this test suite here. I can put this up on GitHub, and then the creator of the pull request can maybe go through these tests on his end to see what, some of those bugs, like remember the NaN one that needs to be fixed, and maybe something else I forgot already. But yeah, on that note, thanks a lot for watching this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, let me know how it went in the comments. Like if this strategy is something you're going to do, let me know. Also give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video.